Hello, listener of the Third Sector podcast. This is Lucinda, and I wanted to tell you about this new piece of content on the Third Sector feed in case you were wondering. In addition to our weekly show, we've just launched When Charity Goes Wrong. It's a 3-part documentary looking at 3 charities that have experienced major challenges. We'll be speaking to people close to the action at each and asking what their cases have to say about how the UK's voluntary sector is run. This is the first episode in the series, and I hope you enjoy it.
I know firsthand the impact Camila had on so many lives, one of them luckily being mine. I remember after meeting Camila and receiving immediate help, I asked her why. Why are you helping? What do you want in return? As I come from a world where there's no such thing as a free drink. And her response was, I want you to be happy. So selflessly.
This is Feras Al-Bakri, speaking at the funeral of Camila Batmanghelidjh in January 2024. Feras is one of tens of thousands of young people who received help from Camila through her charity Kids Company, an organisation that provided stability and support to vulnerable young people through its centres in London, Bristol and Liverpool. Camila's work at the charity earned her a CBE and saw her listed among the UK's most powerful women by BBC Woman's Hour in 2013.
And this is the thing, I think often people forget the humanity of these children. And typical arrival is maybe a 13-year-old boy. He's been run by drug dealers, careering drugs. He's got health issues. He's not been in school since he was 10 years old. And what he wants is somewhere safe. And then, after a few days of trusting us, he will go and bring his younger siblings. And the younger siblings are usually in households where maybe the parent is suffering from mental health difficulties or drug addictions.
The Camberwell headquarters of Kids Company no longer exists, but some of those helped by Camila Batmanghelidjh were there today to remember her.
Camila died on New Year's Day last year, aged 61. Her funeral was a lively, colourful occasion, respecting a wish in her will that under no condition should anyone wear black. Colour is the order of the day. It reflected her signature style of brightly coloured dresses. While Camila was at the helm of Kids Company, it wasn't just the charity's clients like Feras who felt her power.
Camila, for me, was inspiring, and anyone who worked for Kids Company felt the same way. She'd walk into a room and immediately light it up, immediately her energy would hit you.
This is Andy Gough. He's a school teacher who spent 4 years earlier in his career working for Kids Company.
You could see her doing that with celebrities, with politicians. She was an incredible person on that front. Hugely inspiring. She knew her stuff. You knew that she was fighting these kids' corners.
Andy first worked at Kids Company's central office before going on to manage one of its London youth centres.
Once I was on the front line, I barely saw her. And actually, I think she was a mother figure and leader that everyone would have wanted to see every day if they could. You know, you see her once in the year and that was enough to make you feel important.
I ask Andy to tell me the first words that come to him when he thinks back to life at the Kids Company Centre.
Love comes up top. Chaos. These kids were really, really vulnerable and volatile and angry and scared. The main goal of the charity was to help support and love these children and care for these children in a way that they had trusted adults around them and they were able to improve as a result of that.
And how does Andy think Kids Company fared in achieving that goal?
I think we saved lives regularly without knowing it. And how we did that was just having key workers who were trusted, who were there for them regularly. Because we're talking about kids that were homeless, kids that were going from bed to bed. We're talking the most deprived, vulnerable young people.
Andy left Kids Company in 2011 to take up a full-time teaching job. Little did he know at that point that the charity's days were numbered. 4 years later, in August 2015, Kids Company was declared insolvent and went into liquidation. Its collapse sent shockwaves through the charity world, as well as the communities it supported. This is when charity goes wrong. I'm Lucinda Rouse. I'm a journalist at Third Sector. And in this series, we'll be examining the structures surrounding the people who work for the UK's 200,000 registered charities. Those who, like Camilla did, dedicate their lives to furthering a charitable purpose, as well as others whose intentions have been called into question. We'll unpick the stories of 3 organisations that have experienced major and very public challenges over the past decade. We'll ask what each of their cases has to say about how the UK's voluntary sector is run. Today, on When Charity Goes Wrong, Kids Company. I asked Andy how he felt when the news broke that Kids Company had closed.
Yeah, I was gutted, absolutely gutted. I wasn't glued to the screen, but there's news reports coming out at the time. And I remember a couple of stories where I went, hang on a minute, I was probably centre manager there. That's not true. That's elaborated. That's, by the way, very likely because we're talking about kids who will make allegations and all sorts.
So how could one of the country's most prominent children's charities, run by the darling of the great and the good, that was responding to a major social problem, reach the point of irredeemable collapse? And just how instant was its turn of fortune?
There was a good period of a couple of years when they were having difficulties, I would say.
This is Philip Kirkpatrick, a partner at the law firm Bates Wells.
They had shown that they had a method that was working. And the government at the time was very keen to work with the charity sector. So there's David Cameron's period of Big Society. I think Camilla was something of a poster girl of Big Society at the time. They then were being encouraged to expand. And the expansion wasn't really effective. And the funding didn't really follow to deal with that. They were saying, well, look, if you want us to become this kind of organisation, we're carrying out activities that the state really should do. So we need statutory funding. And the statutory funding was promised, but never materialised at the level that was necessary. And so they had a tricky period of a couple of years when they were trying to keep the show on the road, recognising that the funding wasn't coming in that they would need. In the end, they did actually get a promise of about half the funding. And it was to create a charity that was going to be half the size of the charity it had become. The day after that funding came in, they got a telephone call that said something like 62 allegations of child abuse had been made. And they had just been celebrating because they realised they had saved the charity. The funding had come in. More was promised from other people. They knew they could turn the charity around. And then they suddenly realised, who is going to fund us? After all of the bad publicity, who is going to fund us when 62 allegations of child abuse are hanging around our neck? And so they had to wind up the charity. And it seems to me a great shame. If those allegations had not been made, Kids Company would be operating now and would be doing, I think, a great deal of good.
5 months after the allegations first surfaced, a police investigation found no evidence of abuse, criminality, or safeguarding failures. But it was too late by then to save Kids Company. The charity had folded and its centres had closed. So why hadn't the expansion plan worked properly when it had supposedly had the ringing endorsement of the Prime Minister? One of the conditions for receiving the promised statutory funding was that Camilla would step down from the chief executive role, a post she'd held since she founded the charity in 1994. Why was this considered necessary? Here's Andy, the former Kids Company centre manager.
ultimately what was clear is when you run a company as a CEO, you have to be pretty blooming good to do it for 15 years. You'd have to be incredibly astute on a business level. Now, she was incredibly astute on a people level. So she managed the charity incredibly well in terms of people, but in terms of HR and contracts and finance, money was coming in from all angles. I suspect that's where things really fell down. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to tell you that what should have happened is she put someone in charge of the charity on organising the operational side, and then she just carries on with the raising money and actually probably potentially seeing the kids more. But she kept control, and that's probably where things fell down.
So far, Camila has been the central personality in this story of kids' companies' rise and fall. But no charity is a one-person show. And of course, above Camila in kids' companies' governance structure sat the board of trustees. Kids Company was also a limited company, and so when it collapsed, the official receiver in the government's insolvency office launched an inquiry. It came down heavily on Camila and the trustees. The official receiver said they had caused and or allowed Kids Company to operate an unsustainable business model. He applied for their disqualification from future trustee or senior director positions. Along with Camila, all but one of Kids Company's 8 trustees contested the claim. And in 2021, following a 10-week trial, the High Court dismissed the case against them. The judge concluded that they were not unfit to be company directors. On the contrary, she described them as a group of highly impressive and dedicated individuals who showed care and commitment for the charity. But then, a year later, in February 2022, the Charity Commission published a long-awaited inquiry into Kids Company's collapse. It reported findings of financial mismanagement at the charity and echoed the official receiver in places, saying it had operated a high-risk business model after rapidly expanding its operations. And it said the trustees should have acted sooner to stabilise the charity's financial situation. Philip Kirkpatrick advised most of the trustees on their defence in the official receiver's case. I asked him how he felt when he heard about the Charity Commission's assertion that Kids Company's business model had been high risk and characterised by a heavy dependence on grants and donations, reliance on a key individual for fundraising, low reserves, and a demand-led service.
I was quite outraged by that statement, which I think is completely wrong and not founded in any evidence at all. Any charity that has significant service activities and is reliant on donations to fund those is precarious. And I would say that that is probably the vast majority of charities, or a charity that relies on contracts from central or local government. And Kids Company had a fairly typical and relatively broad spread of funding for its operations.
Kids Company pushed back on the inquiry report. Camila said it contained inaccurate information, and she accused the Charity Commission of protecting the very people who drove the damage that caused the charity's collapse. She requested a judicial review of the Commission's report by the High Court. That was granted, but it didn't proceed before her death on the 1st of January 2024. The complaint was taken over by Michael Karim Kerman, a former Kids Company clinical director, and last month, in May, the High Court issued its verdict. This time was a little different. The judge upheld the majority of the Charity Commission's findings, including that of mismanagement by the trustees. But he did describe 2 parts of the report as irrational and extremely unfair. The first related to the trustees' scrutiny of payments made to some of the charity's clients. The Commission said it had seen insufficient evidence of this happening, but the judge in the official receiver's case had already found the level of scrutiny to be adequate. The court also deemed irrational a suggestion by the Commission that if trustees had not made a decision to operate with the low level of reserves that they had, they might have been able to save the charity from insolvency. The Charity Commission acknowledged that it had made important errors in these points and made changes to several paragraphs of this report. I should point out here that it's highly unusual for the High Court to uphold even parts of a challenge to a Charity Commission inquiry report. And it's also rare for the Commission to admit to errors. As this ruling illustrates, in charity law, it's the trustees and not the chief executive who are accountable to the regulator from the charity's formation onwards. So what, in the regulator's opinion, is the key to setting up and sustaining a successfully governed charity? Here's the Charity Commission's chief executive, David Holdsworth.
Keep your charitable purpose central to everything you do. That has to be for the public benefit, as per charity law. And you have to set out to us how you are going to be governed, including your trustee body and what the size, shape, and articles of association are that will empower that trustee body to deliver your charitable purpose.
If you work for a charity, you'll know that trustees are almost always unpaid volunteers who hold ultimate legal responsibility for the organisation's management and administration. It's a long-standing arrangement in charity law. The concept of trustees working on behalf of benefactors for their beneficiaries dates back to Elizabethan times. We spoke to David Holdsworth while Kids Company's judicial review was ongoing, and so he declined to go into the specifics of the case. But I did ask him about the risks of having a big personality in a chief executive role, particularly ones like Camila, who are heavily emotionally invested in the work they are doing, sometimes at the expense of due process.
So look, I think the first thing to say is passion is great. It's what drives the charity sector. Charity is not always easy. You're working on some of the most intractable social challenges that the nation and the world are facing. You're dealing with some of the biggest problems. So passion is actually an essential ingredient across the charity sector. I think where we have perhaps seen dominant individuals in some of our cases, what's important there and what we keep coming back to is your legal duties. And as trustees, it is really, really important that you have really clear governance arrangements. You know, trustees collectively decide who within a charity is empowered to do what.
And how did this shape up at Kids Company? I asked Philip Kirkpatrick whether the charity's governance structures had failed to keep up with its rapid growth.
Honestly, I don't think so. And the government commissioned a report into the governance before funding it. And they had had another report from their own auditors. Those confirmed that the governance systems in place to govern a charity of that size were broadly there. I've, of course, had to trawl over minutes and things for years and look at what that board was doing and trying to do. And it seemed to me to be a very effective board of highly skilled and highly motivated people, at least as good as other boards I've had to advise.
Ultimately, Philip believes it was less to do with oversight and more about the money.
The outcome would have been the outcome, whoever was on that board, unless you simply did not believe that the Prime Minister was going to deliver you the funding that he said he would deliver you. In which case you might have pulled the plug on the whole charity earlier. And, you know, they also had the difficulty of governing an organisation managed by somebody highly charismatic and, frankly, I think difficult to deal with. People who change the world are often quite difficult to deal with, and she was one of those sorts of people.
So how can trustee boards effectively manage difficult people? Here's David Holdsworth from the Charity Commission.
What's important is that you have the correct governance framework in place. that it's balanced, it's proportionate. You understand your risks as a charity. Where are your biggest risks? Are they financial? Are they in safeguarding? Are they in delivery of services? So understanding your risk and then wrapping around those risks a sufficient framework to be able to manage and mitigate them. And that can include, as a trustee board, what are the types of reports you want to see? How frequently do you want to see them? What's the level of detail?
How might this have fitted in with Camilla's way of doing things? Philip Kirkpatrick.
I think Camila couldn't really give many figs for risk. She was quite a driven, forceful person who was willing to take a lot of risks. That obviously needed to be managed and was a difficult thing to do. I often say to people, if you were planning, you've got this great idea to set up some new venture, to do something really important that needs to happen in society, and you're thinking, how should I best do this? Will your first thought be, I know what, we'll get a few people who will work free and part-time. They might come once every 2 or 3 months, and they won't necessarily know everything that's going on, and they won't necessarily be experts in what we're doing, but we'll put them in charge. And when everything goes wrong, they're at fault. It doesn't seem to me to be an obvious, logical way of running anything, and it isn't the way anything is run anywhere in the world, apart from registered charities in the United Kingdom and in a few other places, but not many. What society, the Charity Commission, Parliament seems to expect of trustees in that situation is very unfair, because they are the people who are entirely responsible when everything goes wrong. And like the trustees in Kids Company, they end up in court for 10 weeks and a 5-year wait between insolvency and vindication.
Philip is in favour of having members of a charity's executive team, like the chief executive, on the board of trustees as standard. But he's unconvinced that this alone would have solved Kids Company's problems and prevented its collapse.
I'm not saying it is necessarily going to give you better governance, because I don't think governance is about structures. It's about people and how people work together effectively. But I think it would be a fairer system, and I think it is certainly an appropriate system for many larger charities.
And with all of this in mind, how would Philip feel about taking on a trustee position with a charity like Kids Company if the opportunity presented itself?
I wouldn't take one on personally, which is perhaps a bit cowardly, because I'm quite aware that things could go badly wrong over which I would actually have very little control, and which I would probably not see coming until they arrived, because it's very difficult to see everything as a non-executive director. And the leadership of a charismatic person is going to be exciting. It's possibly going to be world-changing, but it comes with risks, and you need to be able to accept those risks.
It feels difficult to be drawing conclusions about Kids Company without hearing from the main person in all this, Camila. Very sadly, that's not possible. But how does Philip's view shape up with Andy's experience in the youth centre environment, and how Camila dealt with operational risk as the charity grew?
When we managed to get government funding, government money, she called everyone in because it was very apparent that we were going to have to shift our processes to what was sadly the thing that we were always dreading, and that is paperwork, because paperwork takes you away from the kids. And she spoke about that. She was inspirational about why we had to do it and how we were going to do it. But she captivated the room then, and that was another kind of injection of inspiring self, just motivating us all.
What can the charity sector learn from the sorry case of Kids Company? Philip Kirkpatrick.
The difficulty of managing with a charismatic leader and of making sure that that leadership team is working well together, that's something that needs to be high on every charity's agenda.
And do you think the Charity Commission could have intervened
earlier with Kids Company and potentially avoided what happened to it?
That's a really interesting question. I don't think the Charity Commission sees that as its role, and I don't think it was its role to intervene in that way. I think people think that that's what the Charity Commission should do. The Charity Commission quite rightly says, look, this is a matter for the trustees. Are the trustees complying with their duties? If they are, the Charity Commission should back off and let them deal with it. So had Kids Company reached a point where the Charity Commission ought to have said, we think there has been mismanagement or misconduct such that we have enough evidence to require the appointment or to make the appointment of an interim manager, I don't think the Commission would have got there, particularly on the basis of the reports that had been made into the governance of the charity. And I think the Commission would have understood this is a charity under severe financial stress because of possible overexpansion. And the trustees are doing their best to try to overcome that. And I think that's what they would have found, and they wouldn't and probably shouldn't have intervened. With hindsight, so many things are easy. And, one of them is, could Kids Company have closed down solvently? Yes, probably it could 2 years earlier. Would that have been the right thing to do? 2 years earlier, you wouldn't have thought so.
And will anything change as a result of the legal wrangling that's taken place over the last decade?
I think the official receiver is unlikely to bring dubious claims against charity trustees again. They didn't seem to understand how a court would consider the duties of an unpaid, non-executive director of a charitable company. I think they now do understand that, and they're unlikely to bring such a claim again.
Kids Company supporters have described the outcome of the recent judicial review as long overdue justice for the charity and Camilla. Some of them claim to have won the judicial review. But this opinion is not shared by the Charity Commission or indeed the judge. Mr. Justice Sheldon ruled that no side should pay for costs because, in substantive terms, he said, it seems to me that there was no overall winner or loser in this case. But let's end back where we started, at Camilla's funeral, where we hear from Firas once again and how it felt to be part of the Kids Company community.
Kids Company was not just a service, it was a safe space to be, a place we could all go and dream like we've never dreamed before, a place to call home. And even when that was taken from us, she never gave up. While the country was ripping into Kids Company and her, she was still wrapping presents and sorting out food hampers for disadvantaged families. She lived to help like a true selfless angel.
Coming up in the next episode of When Charity Goes Wrong. Could you please start by introducing yourself?
Yes, my name is Hannah Ingram-Moore.
Why did you agree to be interviewed today for this podcast?
Well, I am Denard. We discussed it at length. I'm very careful. I'm here to talk about regulation. It's a brilliant thing to do, to look at regulation. We should be questioning and looking.
We'll hear from two of the people closest to the action at the Captain Tom Foundation. When Charity Goes Wrong is brought to you by Third Sector, the UK's leading title for the voluntary and not-for-profit sector. It was written and presented by me, Lucinda Rouse, and produced by Nav Pal. The executive producer is Ollie Peart at Rethink Audio. We hope you enjoyed this first episode in the series, and if you did, please spread the word and share with others who might be interested in listening. And to make sure you don't miss the next episode, follow us. If you'd like to go the extra mile, leaving a positive rating or review on your preferred podcast platform would really help us. We'd love to hear your feedback on the series. Thank you for listening.